All right, today we're going to look at the third sphere, the hydrosphere. Now, hydro means water, and the hydrosphere is anywhere that you find water. So the hydrosphere will include the oceans, the atmosphere, the land that is on water, the water that is on land, and the water that is percolated into the soil. So that includes all the water in our oceans, lakes, rivers, wetlands, polar ice caps, rock layers, and clouds. Now, the water continuously moves through the atmosphere and the geosphere back and forth through this process that we call the water cycle. And I know you've been talking about water cycle since you were little bitty, but in addition to our three major components, evaporation, condensation, precipitation, that you probably had like a song about when you were in third grade, right? There's some other terms that you may not be as familiar with. So evaporation is when that water turns from liquid water into water vapor. It's heated by the sun, the molecules move apart, turn into the gaseous phase, and then rise into the atmosphere. When they get up to a certain height in the atmosphere, they condense back into bigger water droplets, especially concentrating around those dust particles, and form clouds. When the clouds get heavy enough, then the rain precipitates back. Could be rain, could be sleet, could be hail, snow, lots of ways that we get precipitation. But the other terms that you may not be as familiar with that are still part of that water cycle, one, groundwater. Groundwater is the water in the ground, beneath the surface, in soil, in rock, in aquifer. Infiltration is how that water seeps into the soil. It infiltrates, it soaks in. Percolation, once it's in the soil, that's how it moves from one place to another. So infiltrate is soaking in, percolate is migration once it's in that soil layer. Runoff, if it doesn't soak into the soil, then it runs off into the nearest body of water. It could be a river, lake, stream, or it could evaporate before it gets to that big water, but most of the time it's going to run off into something bigger and then evaporate. And then transpiration is that loss of water from plants. Plants are giving off, they're pulling in water and then they're using some of it and then giving off some of it, and that transpiration is the release of water. For us, for animals, it's respiration. We're giving out water vapor when we breathe. So in some contexts, you may see the water cycle referred to as the hydrologic cycle. That's your big girl word, okay? It's the same thing, same cycle. It's just using a bigger word for water. The primary agent responsible for making this cycle move is the sun. And it also is, once it starts moving, it is the agent for moving and transporting elements, those nutrients that we talked about, the potassium, the phosphorus, the nitrogen. It moves those elements around throughout our soil into the atmosphere and back. The hydrologic cycle moderates our climate, and also that cycle purifies our water. We can impact the hydrologic cycle. One way is deforestation. With less plants, then we have less transpiration. We can also block infiltration. We can pave surfaces, we can build buildings, and that doesn't allow that water to soak in. It reduces the infiltration and the percolation and increases the runoff and flooding. And then we can also divert water in our rivers, lakes, and streams with dams, and that changes the location of our water and how much water is collected at a site. Now, these areas that are draining off of the land, they're called watersheds. A watershed is all the land in a given area, a given landscape that drains into a particular stream, river, lake, or wetland. And we can classify a watershed by looking at the area that it covers, maybe the length, the slope, if it's running down quickly or running very slowly across the land, what type of soil and vegetation occur there, and then if it joins up with other watersheds along its way to the biggest body of water it can find. Usually that big body of water is an ocean, and we have most of our planet covered by ocean. We have, we'll say, 4 major ones and then some minor oceans along the way. The Pacific is the biggest. Now, you don't need to know how many square kilometers it covers, just know it's the biggest. And it also has the deepest point on our Earth. Challenger Deep in the Mariana Trench is deeper than Mount Everest is tall. So try to imagine that. We can divide the Pacific into North Pacific and South Pacific based on where they are relative to the equator and also how the currents move. In the north, the Pacific currents move clockwise, and in the south, they move counterclockwise. Atlantic is the second biggest, and it's also based into North and South Atlantic based on current flow and where they are north or south of the equator. We talked a little bit about the Atlantic Ocean already when we talked about the geosphere. In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, you've got this north-south mid-ocean ridge, which is a spreading center. So actually that Atlantic Ocean is getting bigger all the time, while the Pacific is getting smaller all the time. Then we have the Indian Ocean, the Arctic Ocean. Indian's third, Arctic's fourth. It's not as deep as the Pacific, but it's that area right underneath India, bordered by Australia and Africa. And then the Arctic Ocean is that top part of our globe, mostly covered by ice. And that floating sea ice is formed when the wind and the waves take that frozen seawater and mush it into big masses. Now, ocean water is salty, but it's not just sodium chloride. There's a lot of minerals that are dissolved in ocean water that tends to come from weathered rocks or underground volcanic eruptions. It's rock and stuff that's run off of the Earth's surface and into the ocean and collected. So we get this term salinity. Salinity is the concentration of dissolved salts and everything else. And even though if you've gone to the ocean and you have tasted that salt water, it tastes very, very salty. The average salinity is only about 3.5%. So in places where you get a lot of water runoff and a lot of fresh water entering the ocean, that salinity is actually a little bit lower. In the middle of the ocean where all you have is evaporation happening, it tends to be a little bit higher. But you can see on this chart the breakdown of the dissolved minerals, the solids in ocean water. There is definitely a lot of sodium chloride, but there's also magnesium and sulfur and calcium and some other things that are dissolved in there too. The ocean is divided into zones, much like our atmosphere was, and it also is divided into zones based on temperature. So the boundary where the temperature drops very suddenly is called the thermocline, and that's your difference, your barrier between the surface zone where it's a lot warmer and the deep zone where it's very, very cold. And this is also based off of the sunlight that's able to reach. So sunlight can penetrate that surface zone down to a certain area. The farther you go, the more that energy is lost. It's scattered because of your water molecules. And then in the deep zone, you don't get sunlight at all. And so that's why it's so cold. You don't have that energy coming in. Oceans will absorb and take in that heat from the sun. In fact, over half of the energy from the sun as sunlight is coming in and is absorbed by the oceans. Now, oceans, of course, water has a very high specific heat, so it will heat and cool a lot more slowly than land. And this helps to regulate the climate of our planet. If we were made mostly of land like Mars is, when the sun is shining, all that land would absorb the energy and it'd be very, very hot. On the other side of the planet where the sun's not shining, they would radiate all that energy and would be very, very cold. But with the oceans there, it helps to absorb and regulate that temperature so that it stays a lot more regular. You don't have such a high fluctuation. And those currents that are in our oceans will move that warm water, and that will help to shift the localized climate for some areas. Now, this picture you can see, if you notice, there's Florida, there's the United States. We've got this ocean current that comes up from the equator and runs along the side of North America. This warm water will head over to Europe and actually keeps Spain and France and that area warmer than the northern Canadian areas that are on about the same latitude. So here's a picture of ocean currents around the world. These are prevailing ocean currents. You can have more localized, smaller ones, but these are almost like streams. They're movements of water near the surface of that ocean oftentimes driven by wind, those global wind patterns. They could be warm, they could be cool. Warm if they're going from the equator north or south, cool if they're coming from the poles back to the equator. And they usually don't mix very well. Those different temperatures have different densities, and so they don't mix together very well. You also get deep currents where the water has cooled and constricted and sank and flows from the poles back towards the equator to be rewarmed. Now, there are some fluctuations in these currents. You may have heard of El Nino or La Nina conditions. Let me move myself out of the way. There we go. So normally, this picture in the middle right here, you've got this thermocline. Here's North America, the edge of South America, and you've got this thermocline where you have hot water on the equator very close to Australia. So this is Australia, and then like Asia would be up here just right off the picture. In El Nino conditions, that thermocline shifts to the east, and so that warmer water shifts closer to North and South America. So as a result, we get warmer, wetter weather in North and South America under El Nino conditions. Now that thermocline can shift back, and when you have cooler, drier conditions in North and South America, that's called La Nina. So it's kind of like shifting water in a bathtub, back and forth, back and forth. So here's just another picture of El Nino and La Nina and how that circulation just kind of shifts back and forth across the Pacific Ocean on that equator and brings different weather conditions to North and South America and to Asia and Australia. All right, so let's talk a little bit about freshwater. So only about 3% of all the water on Earth is fresh water. Most of the water on Earth is locked in our oceans and has a high salinity or high. Only about 3% is freshwater, which is usable to us. Most of that 3% is locked in ice caps and glaciers. So the rest of it, the stuff that we can use, is found in lakes, rivers, wetlands, in the soil, in the rock layers, and in the atmosphere. That's the freshwater that's usable to us. So we have a picture here of a river system, which is a network of streams that drain a particular area of land, a watershed, into a river that then flows into a larger body of water, in this case for Texas, into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, smaller streams that flow into bigger streams have the name tributaries. So there are tributaries of the Sabine River, tributaries of the Neches River that flow eventually into the Neches and then out into the Gulf of Mexico. All right, and then groundwater, that water that's underground, makes up less than 1% of all the water that's on Earth. Now, we call groundwater, or an area that can store groundwater, an aquifer, and that allows us to drill into that rock layer or soil and pump out water if we need it. And so that aquifer is where that water is stored and where we can access it. Now, to recharge, to add water back to our aquifer, you have to be able to take that surface water and allow it to infiltrate and percolate back down to that aquifer layer. And where that happens is called a recharge zone. And these recharge zones are very environmentally sensitive because anything that percolates into that area will make its way into the aquifer. So that could include chemicals, pesticides, oil out of your car, any kind of sources like that, any artificial chemicals could make their way into the groundwater. So in these recharge zones, we have to be very sensitive and very careful to not let those things infiltrate that area. Okay, very quickly, we're going to talk biosphere because that's going to be basically the rest of the class. The biosphere is just that thin layer that can support life. It's the uppermost geosphere, most of the hydrosphere, and the lower part of the atmosphere. You have to have liquid water, moderate temperatures, and a source of energy. In that biosphere, that matter and that energy is continually cycled. You have to have an input of energy because we use it for daily functions, and the sun is our input of energy. So the biosphere in our Earth, we consider a closed system. Even though energy comes in from the sun, you still have all of the matter contained in that area. No matter enters or leaves. So that's it for the spheres. We're going to talk nutrient cycles next before we finish up this section.